After Canada announced a $760 billion USD plan to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, the EU quickly responded with a $40 billion USD retaliatory tariff package. Is this the beginning of a global trade war? The European Union didn't take long to respond. Right after President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, the EU quickly introduced a €26 billion retaliatory tariff package, equivalent to about $40 billion US.
Similar to Canada's, they've been very quick and very strict, announcing retaliatory duties on industrial and farm products totaling €26 billion.
The products targeted include industrial items like machinery, cars, and agricultural goods like fruits, vegetables, and wine. Recently, the EU has imposed tariffs on over 2,800 US products, including items like Levi's jeans, whiskey, and Boeing spacecraft. U.S. businesses, particularly in agriculture and industry, will face significant losses due to the loss of export markets. And not only that, they will also face increased production costs. Trade between Canada and the EU has grown by 7% since the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, took effect. A wave of Canadian businesses has quickly taken advantage of this agreement, shifting from the U.S. to potential markets in Europe and Asia. What will the future hold for U.S. businesses? Mexico, one of the U.S.'s largest trade partners and the second largest steel exporter, has chosen a slow and steady approach in its response. They didn't rush to impose retaliatory measures immediately. The Mexican government, under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, decided to negotiate and seek a peaceful solution. But at the same time, they didn't rule out the possibility of imposing tariffs on U.S. goods if necessary. However, Mexico isn't just facing the impact of U.S. tariffs, but also dealing with a decline in exports and the escalating trade tensions that could greatly affect its economy. Analysts forecast that Mexico's steel industry will need to reduce output, while the agricultural sector will face significant challenges, dealing with higher tariffs on products like tomatoes and avocados. The situation in Brazil is not much different. As the second largest steel exporter to the U.S., Brazil is trying to find a way to respond to this decision. Brazil's finance minister, Fernando Haddad, criticized the U.S. tariffs as unreasonable and wrong, and declared that they would seek legal measures at the World Trade Organization, WTO. However, like Mexico, Brazil has decided not to rush into retaliation, but instead will patiently pursue negotiation options to avoid escalating tensions. Tariff retaliations not only affect the partner countries, but also have a significant impact on U.S. businesses. The steel industry will be one of the most affected sectors, as the new tariffs will raise the cost of imported steel, increasing production costs in U.S. factories. This not only drives up product prices, but also diminishes the competitiveness of U.S. products in the international market. The EU has shown strength in this decision and has not hesitated to respond forcefully.
The objective is to counterbalance the increased trade value affected by the US tariffs while minimizing the impact on European businesses and consumers. But the disruption caused by tariffs is avoidable if the US administration accepts our...
However, the issue is not just about the tariffs, but also the political relationship. EU countries have agreed that the US tariff policy not only has a negative impact on the global economy, but also disrupts stability in international trade relations. Stay tuned, because the twists and turns could impact you. USA-Canada tensions. Who will take the hit? The US raises tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%. Canada strikes back immediately, cutting electricity, imposing road tolls, and halting US imports. Tensions between the two nations have never been higher. Is this the beginning of an unprecedented economic war? Trump unexpectedly raises tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. The US government announced an immediate tariff increase on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%. The reason? Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US, affecting 1.5 million households in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. Trump's response was swift and aggressive. Canada is taxing our electricity? We'll hit back even harder. The U.S. also issued a warning. If Canada does not remove trade barriers, tariffs on Canadian car imports could rise in April, a devastating blow to Canada's auto industry. But the biggest surprise didn't come from the US. It came from Canada's fierce retaliation. Canada hits back immediately. Canada refuses to back down. Instead, it fights back harder than ever. Ontario threatens to cut electricity exports to the US entirely if tariff policies are not reversed. British Columbia, BC, immediately enforces new measures, imposing tolls and fees on US trucks passing through BC to Alaska, tightening import regulations on fuel, food, and consumer goods from the U.S. halting purchases of alcohol and agricultural products from certain U.S. states. Other provinces respond with tough countermeasures. Nova Scotia bans U.S. businesses from bidding on government contracts. Alberta warns of further retaliatory measures within 24 hours. Manitoba and Newfoundland remove all U.S. goods from state-run retail stores. What are the consequences of these moves? U.S. freight companies dependent on Alaska routes face severe disruptions. U.S. goods struggle to penetrate the Canadian market. American businesses in Canada start reconsidering operations and adjusting strategies. Canada isn't just retaliating, it's accelerating its plan to break free from U.S. economic dependence. The Canadian government is swiftly expanding trade negotiations with Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The goal? To boost exports to new markets and reduce reliance on the U.S. as quickly as possible. But did Washington truly anticipate this level of trade war escalation? Economic fallout, U.S. stock market plunges, recession fears grow. The U.S.-Canada trade war isn't just political drama, it's already causing real economic damage. Stock markets tumble, S&P 500 drops 0.8% within hours of Trump's announcement. Major steel, aluminum, and auto manufacturers see sharp declines in stock prices. Steel and aluminum prices surge. U.S. manufacturers struggle with rising costs, affecting automobiles, construction, and consumer goods. The auto industry takes a major hit. Leading automakers like Ford, GM, and Tesla scramble to adjust supply chains. Higher production costs could drive U.S. car prices to record highs. But it's not just the U.S. Canada is already shifting away from its economic reliance on the U.S., accelerating trade agreements with the EU, Asia, and Latin America, encouraging Canadian businesses to redirect exports to alternative markets. One undeniable reality: if this trade war continues, it won't just hurt the U.S. and Canada, it could shake the global economy. The big question: is this just the beginning of a full-scale economic recession? U.S.-Canada tensions have reached an all-time high. But is this just the start of a prolonged trade war? The next developments could change everything. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss what happens next. Canada strikes back. Is the U.S. about to face major consequences? The Trump administration imposes a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. In response, Ontario hits back with a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S. Millions of American homes and businesses are now at risk. Where is this trade war heading? Canadian retaliation. Just 2 days after the U.S. announced new tariffs, Canada retaliated immediately. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government imposed a 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of American goods, with plans to expand this to $125 billion in the coming weeks. The affected goods include agricultural products, industrial machinery, and consumer goods imported from the U.S. This means higher prices on food, auto parts, and essential products for American consumers. But Canada isn't stopping at tariffs. The government has taken the dispute to the World Trade Organization, arguing that the U.S. is violating global trade rules. According to Canada, these tariffs serve no justifiable purpose and are merely a form of economic protectionism. However, the biggest shock came from Ontario, when the province targeted a critical U.S. resource: electricity. Ontario's electricity tariff. Ontario Premier Doug Ford wasted no time in responding. His government announced a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S., a move that could have far-reaching consequences. Why is this such a big deal? In 2024, the U.S. imported about 38.9 terawatt-hours of electricity from Canada, 95% of which came from hydroelectric power plants in Ontario and Quebec. States like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota rely heavily on this energy to power industries, transportation systems, and millions of homes. With the new tariff, electricity costs in these states could soar, increasing expenses for businesses and households alike. But Ford took things a step further, warning that if the U.S. continues pressuring Canada, Ontario might cut off electricity exports entirely. This wouldn't just lead to higher costs, it could cause rolling blackouts in key regions during peak demand. Did the Trump administration consider these consequences when deciding to impose tariffs on Canadian goods? Escalation threats. Ontario isn't stopping with electricity. Ford has threatened additional surcharges on each megawatt of power sold to the U.S., making energy even more expensive. And that's not all. The province is considering canceling a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink, which could affect satellite internet service for remote areas. Even more surprising, Ontario may ban the sale of American alcohol in LCBO stores, the largest liquor retailer in Canada. This could hit American beverage companies hard, especially those in border states like New York and Michigan. Will these measures force the U.S. to back down, or will they escalate the trade war even further? Economic fallout for Ontario. While Ontario's countermeasures put pressure on the U.S., Canada itself is also at risk. Ontario is Canada's industrial hub, with key sectors like auto manufacturing, steel production, and technology heavily reliant on trade with the U.S. If this trade war drags on, supply chains could be disrupted, production costs will rise, and many businesses may struggle to survive. To mitigate these risks, the Ontario government has set aside $40 billion in relief funds, offering tax breaks, payroll subsidies, and direct financial aid to businesses and workers. But the real question is, how long can Ontario sustain this trade war before its own economy starts to suffer? U.S. dependence on Canadian energy. The U.S. may be a global energy powerhouse, but in reality, it still depends heavily on Canada. Gasoline prices would skyrocket, impacting transportation and manufacturing. Electricity costs would surge, straining businesses and consumers. And critical industries, such as automotive, steel, and high-tech manufacturing, could face supply shortages. With tensions rising, the biggest question remains: can the U.S. withstand Canada's retaliation, or will Washington be forced to reconsider its tariff strategy to avoid a full-blown energy crisis?
It's the second climb down in as many days over the imposition of trade tariffs. First, Donald Trump rode back in relation to Mexico.
Mexico could cut off the supply of oil, energy, and car parts to the U.S. This could send the U.S. economy into chaos within just 1 week. Can you believe that? Since President Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada, the trade situation between these countries has become extremely tense. So why is Mexico such a crucial factor in the North American trade equation? The main reason lies in the U.S.'s dependence on Mexico in the oil and automotive industries. Mexico provides about 8 to 10% of the total crude oil imported by the U.S., with around 1 million barrels per day flowing through pipelines between the two countries. Additionally, refineries in Texas, California, and other places heavily depend on oil imported from Mexico. A disruption in this flow could lead to higher fuel prices in the U.S. and cause severe inflation. Not only that, U.S. car companies like General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler are closely tied to Mexico, which offers cheap labor and tax incentives. Millions of car parts are produced in Mexico and imported into the U.S. each year. So, if Mexico decides to cut off this supply, how severe would the consequences be? These U.S. companies could face a sharp increase in production costs, and the likelihood of disrupted cross-border automotive supply chains would be extremely high. Known as Plan B, Mexico is preparing retaliatory measures if the U.S. continues to impose tariffs. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, though reluctant to confront the U.S. directly, has no hesitation in saying, "We are ready to act if necessary." Recently, he has gained significant support from the people at home, thanks to his strong stance against Trump's policies. If negotiations fail to produce results, Mexico will not hesitate to take strong action. According to sources, Mexico may impose tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, particularly items like corn, soybeans, and beef, products that make up a significant portion of U.S. exports to Mexico. This would have severe consequences for U.S. farmers and consumers. Furthermore, Mexico could blacklist U.S. companies, making it difficult for these businesses to operate in Mexico. This would deal a major blow to large American companies that benefit from low production costs in Mexico. These decisions could disrupt global markets, especially in the automotive and energy sectors. Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, is working hard to ease tensions through diplomacy. On March 6th, Sheinbaum will have a direct phone call with President Trump, seeking a peaceful solution before any retaliatory measures are implemented. She boldly stated, "We don't want a trade war. But if tariffs continue, Mexico will not stand by and watch the U.S. destroy its economy. However, if negotiations fail, Mexico will announce retaliatory measures on March 9th. This call will decide a lot about the future tensions in North America, as both countries don't want to lose the economic benefits they've built over decades. A full targeted trade war between the U.S. and Mexico would certainly have no winners. The automotive industry might be one of the first victims, with rising production costs and disrupted supply chains. U.S. energy companies would also need to find alternative oil supplies, which could drive fuel prices up, negatively impacting America's consumer economy. Despite all the tension, Mexico continues to assert that they're ready to confront this situation to protect their national interests. But can the U.S. handle these strong blows from Mexico? And will President Trump accept a compromise to avoid a full targeted trade war? Let's see if the next developments match your predictions.
Right, as President Trump walks back tariffs on most products from Mexico and Canada again, Canada says retaliatory tariffs will stay in place until that pause is permanent.
Canada has just announced a $760 billion plan to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, and this has even left the European Union surprised. Instead of accepting the losses from the new tariffs, the people and businesses of Canada have taken decisive action. From small shops to large supermarkets, they're finding ways to boycott American products and turn to local goods or seek European brands. Online stores specializing in Canadian products have also seen a strong wave of searches from consumers. Facing growing dependence on the U.S., Canada hasn't just reacted with retaliatory measures. The country has started to rebuild trade relations with other regions, especially Europe and Asia. The EU has become a key partner, as the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, opens up easier access for Canadian products. According to the latest figures, trade between Canada and the EU has increased by 7% since the agreement took effect. A new wave of Canadian businesses has quickly taken advantage of the benefits from this agreement, reducing their dependence on the U.S. market.
On electricity exports to Americans living in 3 U.S. states starting tomorrow. The move potentially raising costs and could threaten grid stability for 1.5 million customers. Premier Ford says, blame your president.
Canada is doing something few expected, using energy as a strategic tool. Canada's oil, gas, and electricity have become weapons in this economic war. In 2023, Canada provided over 50% of the U.S.'s imported oil. However, Canada is no longer just selling energy to the U.S. Countries in Asia, like Japan and South Korea, have started importing oil and gas from Canada, reducing their dependence on energy from the Middle East. Canada's newly expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline system could help the country export oil to Asian nations at a much higher value than the U.S. market. This could put the U.S. at risk of facing an unstable energy supply in the future.
Has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
An important consequence that can't be ignored is the shift in Canada's internal politics. When the U.S. imposed tariffs, it not only threatened Canada's economy, but also sparked a strong wave of nationalism. Canadians, who have always valued peace and cooperation, are now rising to defend their national sovereignty. Even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has seen strong support from the Canadian people, with approval for his party unexpectedly surging. Canada's political landscape has changed significantly as everyone unites against the threat from their southern neighbor. There's no denying that the change in Canada's economic strategy will have far-reaching long-term impacts. Canada is truly finding its own path, no longer dependent on the U.S. market. Trade relations with partners like Japan, South Korea, and EU countries will continue to grow strong. Although this trade war may be a huge shock for Canada, it also opens up an opportunity for the country to assert its role on the global stage. North American relations may never be the same again, and this will impact not just Canada, but also the U.S.'s position in the global economy. Canada has not only withstood the attacks from the U.S., but has also found ways to restore its position internationally by diversifying trade partners, reducing dependence on the U.S., and using energy as a strategic tool. Canada has laid the foundation for a more independent future. Will the U.S. recognize this shift? And can the relationship between the two nations ever recover as it once was? Stay tuned for the next developments.